Most people think having $20,000 saved means they are safe. But in reality, this is where many people get stuck. Not because they make reckless decisions, but because they start treating money like capital before it actually is. This is how it works. At this level, money no longer feels scarce, yet it is still not deep enough to absorb real mistakes. So people begin deploying it, reallocating it, testing ideas, and forcing it to perform while believing they are being responsible. That is when the damage starts. Nothing breaks immediately. There is no warning and no visible failure. The money simply loses its position. And by the time people notice, they are no longer ahead, they are just trying to avoid falling backward. This video explains why $20,000 is one of the most deceptive financial positions you can be in, and why this level quietly stops more people than any other. When savings start getting treated like capital, most people do not lose money at this level because they take extreme risks. They lose money because they mislabel what they have. $20,000 feels like capital, but structurally it still behaves like savings. And that confusion is the starting point of the trap. Capital is money designed to absorb stress. Savings are money designed to avoid it. And at this level, people start using savings with a capital mindset, expecting performance, movement, and progress without having the buffer that capital actually requires. Once that happens, every decision changes. At lower amounts, people are careful, every move feels expensive, and every loss feels unacceptable. At much higher amounts, people are protected by scale, mistakes hurt, but they do not threaten position. But here money feels usable while remaining fragile. That is why this level creates activity instead of clarity. Once money stops being treated as protection, people begin to put it to work. They allocate portions, justify exposure, and rationalize movement. Not aggressively, but responsibly. And that is what makes it dangerous. Because responsibility, when misunderstood, often looks like action. At this stage, doing nothing feels wrong, leaving money untouched feels inefficient, and waiting feels like wasting opportunity, so money starts moving before the structure is ready. And movement creates exposure. What most people do not calculate is that exposure does not need to be reckless to be damaging, it only needs to be persistent. A small amount of exposure repeated over time without sufficient margin slowly erodes position. This is where people begin mistaking activity for progress. They feel involved, they feel engaged, they feel like they are building something, but financially they are only increasing surface area, not depth. And surface area without depth is vulnerability. Another issue that appears here is partial commitment. People rarely deploy the full amount, they split it, and this feels safer, but splitting small capital does not reduce risk, it fragments attention. Each allocation becomes too small to matter, yet too large to ignore. Losses do not teach clearly and wins do not move the needle, so people adjust constantly. Constant adjustment at this level is not optimization, it is friction. Every adjustment introduces new assumptions, new timing, and new chances for error. This is also where people start measuring progress emotionally instead of structurally. They ask whether something is happening instead of whether their position is stronger than before. That question swap is subtle but critical. Because once money is treated as something that needs to feel productive, logic begins bending. At this stage, very few people step back and ask a hard question. If this money is not enough to change my position meaningfully, why am I forcing it to behave as if it is? Most people do not ask that because it challenges the belief that progress must be visible. But real progress at this level is invisible. It looks like restraint, it looks like inactivity, and it looks like patience that feels uncomfortable. And that is why so many people fail here. Not because they were careless, but because they respected the money emotionally instead of structurally. This is the first lock of the $20,000 trap. Once savings are treated like capital, everything that follows becomes harder to reverse. Why confidence peaks before experience ever arrives. Confidence at this level does not come from results, it comes from familiarity. By the time someone reaches $20,000, they have usually consumed enough information to feel competent. They have seen patterns, heard explanations, and learned the language of money well enough to feel oriented. That sense of orientation creates a quiet but dangerous illusion. Familiarity begins to feel like experience. But in finance, experience is not knowledge. Experience is what remains after consequences have been lived through and survived. At this level, most people have never gone through a full negative cycle with money that actually mattered to them. They have not been forced to wait while capital was locked. They have not lived through extended drawdowns, and they have not learned how long recovery can truly take. Yet their confidence behaves as if they have. This is where decision-making subtly changes. Protection slowly gives way to optimization. Instead of asking how to keep their position stable, people begin asking how to improve it, refine it, and accelerate it. On the surface, this looks intelligent and controlled. In reality, it introduces fragility. Optimization assumes stability, and stability does not exist at this level. What makes this phase especially deceptive is that early outcomes often reinforce the wrong lesson. A small win feels like proof of competence, and a manageable loss feels like confirmation of control. Confidence begins growing faster than structure. People start trusting their judgment before it has ever been tested under real pressure. And when pressure eventually appears, it does not arrive cleanly or suddenly. It builds while confidence is already high. That is when losses stop being evaluated objectively and start being interpreted personally. Instead of asking whether a position still makes sense, people begin adjusting it in an attempt to recover comfort. Adjustments become reactions, and reactions become habits. This is the beginning of reactive behavior. Reactive behavior is rarely obvious. It does not look like panic. It looks like small changes, early exits, timing shifts, and additional layers added to regain a sense of control. Each move feels reasonable on its own, but together they change the entire structure of decision-making. What began as a plan slowly turns into a response system. And response systems are inefficient by design. Another problem with confidence at this level is that it compresses time. People begin expecting results sooner than they should, not because they are reckless, but because they believe they are past the waiting phase. They assume they have already paid their dues. But financially, this level still functions as an apprenticeship. It exists to expose weakness, not to demonstrate mastery. Confidence reframes it as a proving ground. Once that happens, patience starts feeling unnecessary. Waiting feels passive, and inaction feels like indecision. So people act earlier than they should, not aggressively, but prematurely. And premature action is one of the most reliable ways mid-level capital loses its position. From the inside, this phase feels calm, measured, and rational. There is no obvious sense of danger. Only in hindsight does the pattern become clear. Confidence peaked before experience ever arrived. This is the second lock of the $20,000 trap. When confidence grows faster than experience, every decision carries more weight than it should, and the margin for error quietly disappears. What the $20,000 level is actually, for most people, misunderstand what this level is meant to do. They treat $20,000 as a test of skill, a signal of readiness, or a point where things are finally supposed to move faster. Structurally, however, this level serves a very different purpose. It is not designed to reward performance. It is designed to expose weakness. At this amount, money is large enough to trigger confidence, yet still small enough to punish impatience. That combination turns this level into a filter. The people who move past this level do not do anything impressive here. They do not chase growth, they do not force outcomes, and they do not try to prove that they are ready for the next stage. They focus on positioning. Positioning means staying liquid longer than feels comfortable. It means keeping structures simple even when simplicity feels unsophisticated. It means resisting the urge to act just because money is available. This is difficult because $20,000 creates pressure without providing safety. It feels too meaningful to leave untouched, yet too fragile to be aggressive. That tension is what breaks most people. They begin acting not because the structure demands it, but because the money feels like it should be doing something. Action becomes a response to discomfort, rather than a response to opportunity. This is how money loses its position without a single obvious mistake. The trap is not losing money quickly. The trap is eroding optionality. Every unnecessary move reduces flexibility. Every forced decision narrows future choices. Over time, the person is no longer choosing from strength, but reacting from constraint. Those who survive this level understand a quiet rule. Progress here is invisible. It does not show up as returns, momentum, or excitement. It shows up as the absence of damage. They exit this phase without stories, without screenshots, and without dramatic lessons. They move forward simply because nothing broke. Most people underestimate how rare that outcome is. The majority of people who reach this level end up resetting. Not publicly and not dramatically, but quietly. They pull back, rebuild confidence, and start again from a weaker position. And most of them never fully understand why. They believe the problem was timing, strategy, or execution. In reality, the problem was misuse of the phase itself. This level was never meant to accelerate. It was meant to prepare. Preparation is boring. It produces no visible progress and no emotional reward. But it creates continuity. And continuity is what allows capital to eventually compound. Once people move beyond this level, they rarely talk about it. There's nothing memorable about surviving quietly. But when you look closely at those who did, a pattern always appears. They respected limitation. They delayed complexity. They refused to let confidence outrun structure. That is the exit from the $20,000 trap, not growth, not aggression, not intelligence, restraint. If this breakdown clarified something you have already observed, but never fully articulated, that is intentional. This channel is not about promises or shortcuts. It is about patterns that quietly shape outcomes long before results appear. If you want clarity instead of noise, subscribe.